Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eyes at the Brown County Library. We are interviewing candidates in the 2014 elections. We're interviewing Joe Kitchens of Sturgeon Bay. He's a Republican running in Assembly District 1. Joe, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Joe, give us an overview of your background again and why you decided to get into this.
Yeah. Well, I'm a large animal veterinarian. I graduated from Ohio State in 1983, and after a year in Mayville, Wisconsin, my wife and I moved to Sturgeon Bay. She's a veterinarian also. She does small animals and I do large animals. So we started our practice then, and as it grew, we separated the two practices off as we added more veterinarians. We have 3 children. The youngest just graduated from high school last year, so I'm an empty nester now, and so this opportunity came at a good time for me. I've been active in the community. I've been on the Sturgeon Bay School Board for 15 years now. The last 13 I've been president. I guess that's it in a nutshell.
Well, I like it when I have local officials because I can really ask them 3 or 4 years later, impact of Act 1 on your school
or Act 10.
district. Or Act 10, excuse me. Act 10.
Well, on our school district, it worked out pretty well. You know, it was a very difficult time. There was a lot of unrest. Obviously, teachers were very upset, and it strained our relations. I'd gotten along very well with the teachers up to that point, and after that, it became a little more difficult. It's settled down again now. You know, I think Act 10 was really necessary, though. Things had gone too far in one direction. I think in particular, you look at the health insurance. By law, we have to bid out anything that we buy that costs $10,000 or more, but we were spending over $2 million on health insurance, and we couldn't bid that out. So I think that it had to happen, and I think actually if you look at it now in our school system, you know, even the teachers, if they were being really honest, would say I think things run better now. It's not as confrontational. We work together and find solutions to things. So you know, as far as our district too, prior to Act 10, actually, we'd had a lot of layoffs. You know, the previous administration, they said they're pro-education, but in all honesty, our funding kept getting cut, but yet we had no tools for reducing our expenses. So with Act 10, we've been able to, especially like you said, you know, health insurance and some of those other areas where we're able to reduce our expenses, and we have not really had to lay off teachers since that time. So.
Well, let's cast it forward. If you're a member of the Assembly, one of the biggest items in the next 2-year state budget is funding for public schools. Mm-hmm. What should be the priorities going forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously money has to be spent intelligently, and again, with my background, I'm obviously very pro-education, and that's going to be one of my top priorities, to make sure that our schools are adequately funded. I think we need to change the formula. I think the formula, and maybe that was going to be one of your other questions, but I think the formula, you know, it was designed in 1992, and they were going to, you know, to think that we could come up with a formula that was going to be fair for all the districts across the state, you know, growing, shrinking, rich, poor, it was kind of ridiculous. And I think we're seeing that, and I think the funding formula basically needs to be changed. It just is not fair. You have districts that are growing that are putting money in the bank, and you have districts that are declining that are starving. So that has to be addressed.
What's the biggest change you'd like to see in a new funding formula, sir? Something like you just outlined?
Yeah, I think so, and I think there has to be a little better mechanism for local control. You know, it never goes back. Once control's taken away, it's tough to get it back. But I think that's the general direction we need to go, and allow those local elected officials to have more say in things.
A big question in terms of the next state budget is whether Vouchers Choice should expand. Your position?
Yeah, you know, I have pretty mixed feelings on that. You know, as far as just the school choice within public schools, I support that. I think first off, I need to say that, you know, parents have a right to decide where their kids are going to go to school, whether it's public school, private school, homeschooled. The more involved parents are, the better their children do. So I fully support them having those options. Now, with the voucher system, you know, it was designed primarily for the inner city where the schools were failing. I think all of our schools within the 1st Assembly District are not failing. We have excellent schools. So I don't think it's nearly as important in our district as it is in those others. As far as expanding it, I want to look at it very closely. I think that, is it really accomplishing our goals of letting kids have opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have. There's evidence that an awful lot of those kids would have gone to that school anyway. So we really need to look at that to balance it. I think, too, some people want to open it up. Every kid should just get a voucher and go wherever they want.
They do. A voucher in every backpack is
right. I think that's good rhetoric, but there are like 125,000 kids in the state that go to either private school or homeschooled. Where are we going to find money to give them each $8,000? So, I don't think we can afford that. And so I'm going to look at it very carefully as far as expansion. Again, if it's giving kids opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise had, then I'm all for it. But I want to analyze that.
Since our last interview, Governor Walker has asked that the Senate and the Assembly withdraw Wisconsin from Common Core. Your position?
Oh, boy.
These are tough issues.
They are tough issues.
Especially for a school board president.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm happy to talk about them. Common Core obviously is very controversial. It's become extremely political. It started out with very good intentions. It was the Republican or the Governors Association which came up with the idea. It was Republican-controlled. Governor Walker was on it. And the idea was to make our schools more globally competitive. I mean, who can argue with that? I think, though, that if we adopt them, we need to maintain as much local control as possible. I've worked with Common Core a lot. There's some bad things in Common Core, but there's a lot of good in it. And, first off, one of the things that the bad name that he gets comes from states like Florida and Texas, where the state actually chooses the textbooks they're going to use, chooses the curriculum, and we don't do that in Wisconsin, and I hope we never do. But anyway, so Common Core gets a bad name because of that. There is a lot of good in Common Core, and in a way, sort of the silly thing about it is whether we throw it out completely or whether we just change it to suit our needs, which is what I believe we should do. In the end, I think we're going to end up in the same place. The states that have thrown it out, Indiana was the first, and they came up with their own version of their own curriculum or own standards. Well, it looks an awful lot like Common Core. Iowa came up with Iowa Core. I can't tell the difference between Iowa Core and Common Core. So it's a lot of politics, and to be honest, I think the governor as well as Mary Burke are playing the political game, and I think it's a shame when something like education, which is so important to me, where those games are played. But I think we're going to end up in the same place either way. So to me, to throw it out is a little silly. I think we just change it to suit our needs.
I asked you about it in our last interview, but it's still a huge issue. Transportation funding. The Taxpayers Alliance says if you fund at the 2013 levels for 10 years, you're $2 billion short. Your thoughts on making up that deficit?
Yeah, boy. And that's one of the most crucial issues facing our state. We have to find a steady supply, a steady revenue source for our transportation system. Our businesses rely on it. The safety of our people rely on that. And I don't know where it's going to come from. I'm certainly willing to look at all the options that have been laid out there, but it needs to be done. It came about more than anything because cars are getting better gas mileage than they used to, and we have a flat rate on gasoline, which it probably should have been a percentage to start with because it never goes up with inflation, obviously. So the funding source we have is inadequate, and we have to find another source. Now, nobody wants to raise taxes. I'm running for office. I'm not going to say I'm going to raise taxes, but we do need to find a source for it.
Okay.
So.
Health care, as you know, 1 in 5 Wisconsin residents get their health care from Medicaid. The American Hospital Association says our Medicaid reimbursement rates are the second lowest in the nation.
Right.
Should they be increased?
Theoretically, yes, they should. I don't think it's very fair to count on our healthcare providers to make up that difference. Especially those hospitals where they see a very large percentage of Medicaid patients, it creates quite a strain on them. Now, how that fits into the budget picture, I don't know. And until I get down there and see how that can be done, there are a lot of things that obviously we would like to spend more money on. But I think that, at some point that needs to be addressed because they are, they're shifting the costs over to those of us that are insured, and they're taking a beating themselves, and it's not a very fair system.
As a school board president, you've dealt with the finances. And just today, the Legislative Reference Bureau came out with a memo saying there could be a rather significant deficit heading into the next 2-year budget cycle. Yeah. If there is a deficit, how would you fix it?
Yeah. First off, those projections are based on a model of no growth and no increased, revenue, as well as no cost savings. So, I hope that they're not going to be as severe as what they've laid out.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing is we're going to do like families do when they can't meet their budget. We need to, find ways to reduce expenses. not easy to do. But I guess I'm going to go in there with an open mind and look at it all. I don't feel the obligation to defend what's been done in the past. If it's wrong, I want to change it. So I want to look at all those, where we can cut more money, how we can raise revenue, but
there will be another bill introduced for medical marijuana, and Colorado and Washington now have legalized recreational marijuana.
Yeah.
Your positions?
Well, I'm glad that they're being the guinea pigs for us, and we can see how it goes there. I'm not very comfortable with it the way it is right now. I mean, it's honestly what they're doing is illegal. They're breaking federal law by allowing that, and theoretically, anybody that's in that industry right now, whether it's the growers or the people transporting it, could be arrested because it's against law. I'm not very comfortable with Wisconsin following that path, and until we get some, clear guidance from the federal government on whether it's illegal or not, I'm not willing to look at that, I guess. As far as medical marijuana, I think there are other drugs that can be used to treat the symptoms that are treated with medical marijuana. But, I'm not opposed to if a doctor honestly feels that that's going to be the best treatment for their patient, that we do it. I just think you have to be careful how you write that law, because I think in some places where they've allowed medical marijuana, the law's just become a sham, and it's an easy way for people to get, marijuana for recreational use. So, I guess that's where I stand on it. And again, we can see how it goes in Colorado and Washington and see what the people of the state feel about it. I mean, the other thing is that, we're having a serious epidemic with heroin in the state right now, and I think you need to see how that all ties together as well. So there's a lot to look at. I certainly wouldn't want it to be one of the first states to jump into that. So
the law that passed early last session that changed the mining rules to let go-Giebig taconite potentially apply for a permit in
Right.
Ashland and Iron. Do you know enough about that bill? Is that something you would have voted for?
Honestly, since it doesn't affect our area, I don't know enough about that particular bill to say, and I guess we'll have to see whether that accomplishes what we need, whether it needs to be looked at again.
Fair enough. First offense, drunken driving. Should it be a crime?
In looking at it more, I think I see that we are way behind other states as far as our penalties for first offense drunken drivers. Now, my initial reaction when hearing about that is, a person makes a mistake once, you don't want to punish them for the rest of their lives. But, I'm willing to look at it just because the problem is that the laws that we have right now are not not painful enough, I guess, for people to keep them from recommitting. And we need to do something to prevent that from happening, because that's been the problem. I think, nobody has a problem with us coming down harder on repeat offenders, but if we can make it a little tougher on those first-time offenders so that they really think hard before they do that again, then I think it needs to be looked at. I still have a little difficulty with branding someone for the rest of their life over a mistake they make when they're young, maybe. But we do need to toughen those laws, it seems.
Okay. And finally, do you want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent on November 4? As I think my opponent told you, we've known each other for quite a while, and I respect him. But I do think there are some pretty fundamental differences between us, and I guess I should point those out. I've been a little reluctant to in the past just because, I've known him for a long time. But, I think all of us are shaped by our life experiences, and it shapes our opinions on our approaches to things. And I think if you look at our two backgrounds, he worked in the private sector over 30-some years ago, and since that time he's been a public employee, whereas I started my own business. I've created jobs. I've dealt with health insurance. I mean, I've provided health insurance for my employees for 30 years. When I started out at $200 for a family plan with a $500 deductible, Now it's $1,000 and it's a $5,000 deductible. So I've been through all those wars, So I see all that. So I think that definitely shapes my opinion on, what it takes to create jobs. And I don't mean that in any way to be disrespectful for public employees. I value their work, but I don't think it's quite the broad background that I have. He's on Wisconsin Retirement Fund, so he's not had to face those issues that most of us have to. When can I retire? How much do I need to have in the bank before I can do that? And the other thing, I think, if you just look at our community service and what I've been able to do in the community during the time I've lived here, I think I'd be happy to compare that to him, as well as the leadership positions that I've had. So I think all of those things, have shaped who I am and shaped my approach to these things. In my job, I travel from Washington Island down to Kewaunee County. I deal with rich people, poor people. I just feel like I really know our county. I know the people's concerns. I
I've experienced a lot of them myself, and I think he's been somewhat sheltered from that. And again, not to say he's not a good man, and I value our public employees, but there are very real differences, and it does affect our opinions on things.
Thank you. Joel Kitchens of Sturgeon Bay is a Republican candidate in Assembly District 1. Joel, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Thanks, and thanks for doing this. I think you guys provide a terrific service. So thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks.